Side left. Scott Fitzgerald, Sports Radio 1340 fan, Lubbock, Texas. Coach, how has your offense evolved, and are you planning on rolling out anything new in the Big 12?
Yeah, we'll probably put something new out there. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but it's evolved. I mean, obviously, 8 years in Lubbock working for Coach Leach, the offense was kind of set, and then made the decision 4 years ago to break away from him and to go down to the University of Houston. And every time you change a job, you got to look at what your personnel is, and you got to try to tweak some things to fit what your personnel is. So, we tweaked it a little bit at Houston. When we went to Oklahoma State, we tweaked it a little bit at Oklahoma State, and then last year when we went to West Virginia, we tweaked it a little bit. Specifics would take a couple of days to get into, but I'd like to say we put our own spin on it, and we're doing our best to be able to, fit with what the players are, so we'll see what happens.
Good question. Kirk, put your hand up.
Kurt Bowles from the Austin American Statesman. Dana, Geno Smith was preseason All-Big 12 quarterback, and how big a compliment is that considering the quarterbacks that are already here? And what was his biggest progression from the start of last year to the end of last year?
Well, it sounds like everybody in the room thinks that we're pretty good, or that Geno's pretty good from all that. It's a compliment to Geno. I think a lot of it is based on what happened the last game of the year, which, in all my years, over 15 days, and went into the game with a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. So he progressed, and he's got a chance to be pretty good. He stacks up with a lot of the other guys I've had in the past. Ultimately, it's how many games you win, and him going into his senior year, he's going to be remembered for how many games you win. If you look back at some of the guys in the past, Graham Harrell back in 4 years ago at Texas Tech was a good player, but they won 11 games his senior year. And Case Keenum last year, was fortunate. Coach Case, and they won 12 or 13 games. Brandon Whedon last year at Oklahoma State. I think they won 15 games last year, or whatever it was. But so ultimately he's going to be remembered for how many games he can win, and Geno's got the ability to make everybody else around him better.
Question on the outside right.
Coach Sean Fryer with K-State Collegiate. You guys were picked number 2 in the preseason poll. 2 guys on the preseason team. How do you handle such high expectations coming into the new league, both to put wins on the board and for players to put up numbers and be successful?
Well, you don't get ahead of yourself, I guess. It seems like I haven't seen these guys in 2-3 months because we can't work with them right now. So, when we get back next week, we'll give them a week off and come back next week, and that's what camp's all about. If you think you got a guy that's reading his press clippings, and it's your job as a coach to make sure you bring him down. I think we got some guys. You mentioned Geno, and then Tavon Austin's the other guy that's on that list, which Tavon's potentially one of the more dynamic guys that I've been around. So he's got a chance to be good. And what's awesome about the Big 12, as opposed to where we were last year, is just the national exposure. It's going to be West Coast to East Coast, and they're going to be putting some venues to be able to shine if they can handle that. And that's our job as coaches, to put them in those positions and make sure that they're prepared, and then get them on that stage and see what they can do from there. So managing expectations is part of our job. It's obviously better to have high expectations than it is low expectations.
We got a question on the aisle, and we'll go over it to Tim.
Dana, over here on your right. John Hoover from the Tulsa World. As a career offensive coach, a guy who made us, had so much focus on offense, what do you think you've learned as a head coach about defense, whether it's being around the defensive coaches more or being around the defensive players more?
Yeah, just spending more time with them. Offensively, as a coordinator, you view yourself as the head coach of one half of the ball, and that's what your job is, and that's what your focus is. As a head coach, you know, you got the whole team. So the day I got, you know, announced as the head coach, my first objective was to sit down and get to know the defensive guys. You got to get to know them. You got to figure out what makes them tick. And you're not just talking to half the squad. You're talking to the entire squad. So I view it the same thing. There's just more bodies in the room, you know, and you got to figure out what makes them tick. You got to figure out what motivates them. You got to figure out, you know, what the pulse of the team is by identifying a couple of guys. You know, our challenge this year defensively is to identify who those guys are. I'm not sure I haven't figured out who those guys are this year. Last year, you know, we leaned on Najee Good, who was our defensive MVP, who was a draft pick. Keith Handy, who was a draft pick. Bruce Irvin, who was a high draft pick. Those were some guys that we leaned on last year. You know, and through those guys, I got the beat of the entire defense, and we were able to win some football games because of it. So that's going to be our challenge now. Everybody's dealing with the same thing. Everybody loses guys, and each year you line up and you get in camp and you practice and you figure out who those guys are, and you lean on them.
Tim, yeah, on the left side, about halfway back.
Dana, Tim Griffin with the Express News in San Antonio. You mentioned earlier the fact you've been in the Big 12 for 9 of the
From Dallas. I didn't have any offers. It was an undersized quarterback. Threw for about 4,500 yards, 45 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. Pretty good senior year. So that's kind of our approach with Texas is to you know, just make sure that we're getting good quality players that really have great senior years.
Question on the outside right, and we're going to cluster to the front left.
Brendan Morris of the Daily Legion. We've talked a lot about the offenses in the Big 12, and that means they're going to play on the stage. Does it concern you that their offense, with obviously some tweaks and changes, is the most recent offense of yours outside of West Virginia?
Who did you mention? I didn't hear that.
As far as just playing Oklahoma State, does that concern you that that's your most recent offense?
It doesn't. I mean, every game's a concern. I can assure you that. I mean, that's all 9 games that we play in the Big 12 are going to be a tremendous concern. You know, that's you know, they'll probably know as much about us as we will them. You know, so that's we got some guys defensively that come from there. Obviously, we got some guys offensively that come from there. It'll probably be similar to the way it was back in 2000 when Coach Leach left Oklahoma and went to Texas Tech. You had 2 teams playing the same offense that knew a lot about each other. So I don't know if that'll help you or hurt you.
Good question on, there we go, thank you. On the middle halfway.
Hey, John Harrison, Pittsburgh Tribune Review. Coach, given what's happening at Penn State, regarding the players, what is your philosophy in general with players that have the option to transfer to other schools? What is West Virginia's position on that as far as looking at those type of players?
Well, we don't take a whole lot of transfers. I think the biggest thing, whether it's, you know, you take transfers if other than that, I think what you want to do is you want to fill your team full of a whole bunch of high school kids and watch them mature over the course of 4 to 5 years. If you surround your team, which is really what West Virginia's done, you know, for the last decade, is get a bunch of good high school coaches in there, put them through your strength and conditioning program and watch them mature. And then with stability of the coaching staff, I think that's important because if you're told the same thing, you know, day in and out. So that's what you do, but from a transfer standpoint, you know, shoot, I think if you have a need, that's kind of where you go.
Question on the outside left.
Coach, what are your expectations year 1 to year 2 of the offense, and specifically year 1 to year 2 with Geno Smith?
Should be better. Everything's better the second year. You know, it was evident last year, you know, with Brandon, you know, at Oklahoma State. Year 2 was more comfortable. It was very evident at Houston going in from our first year to our second year with Case. Was much more comfortable. So you can just see Geno with a little bit more confidence right now. You can, you know, it makes more sense to him. So he's going out there in the summertime for, you know, a bunch of voluntary activities. But, you know, after having a year under your belt, it's easier to get a bunch of guys out there and practice on their own. So there should be improvement. If not, we're not doing a very good job offensively as coaches. But it's exciting right now. We got nine starters back on offense. We got 20 kids that play football for us on offense. So it's not only familiar with Geno, and I don't want to put a whole bunch of pressure just on Geno. Look, we're not going to win. We're not going to win games with Geno and Geno alone. He's got to have a whole bunch of guys around him that make plays and that understand the offense, and that's how you get good offensively. But I feel good about it based on having 9 starters back and 20 guys that play ball.
Question in the middle, 3 rows back.
And having spent so much time in the Big 12 and now West Virginia, how would you compare the cultural differences between this area and West Virginia, and how do you think it'll fit in, compare and contrast?
Well, there's similarities from a program standpoint. Like I mentioned earlier, I mean, it's, you know, West Virginia's used to winning football games. There's a whole bunch of teams in the Big 12 that are used to winning football games. You fill your stadium up because it's important to the fan base. And, you know, everybody in the Big 12 fills their stadium up because it's important to their fan base. It's an exciting time for everybody. Differences, probably just region, just geographically. You know, state of Texas and the state of Oklahoma do a great job with their youth. They do a great job with summer activities. You know, high school coaches, there's spring football, there's plenty of opportunities to get better. You know, from the East Coast standpoint, we don't do that on the East Coast. There's not as much spring football, there's not as much youth activities, and I think probably the differences are is from a skill standpoint, they may not be as developed yet. Now, with that said, we've had, you know, we've been going through the practice time there for 18 months. So I think we're at a point now where you understand what the culture is from a throwing the ball standpoint, understand what's expected, understand what it takes to be good. So it took some time to get to that point, but I do think we're better at that now. And defensively, we're catching up just because of the guys that we got in place understand what the ball's like, and they're going to coach it that way.
Okay, Coach, thank you very much for your comments.